Welcome back to the first plenary session of the day. Those of you who've already been working hard since 8 o'clock this morning, congratulations. My name's Quentin. I'm Associate Editor of the Financial Times, and it's my great joy to be back in Tallinn. Thank you very much, all those responsible for inviting me here. It's a joy to come back to this Lennart Meri conference, which is, I think, now probably the fourth time I've been here, certainly the third. And it's always a really lively and interesting occasion, and a very different perspective to actually be looking at the world at. I'm sitting in Berlin at the moment, which is also a very interesting perspective to take, looking at the European Union. Is it the new capital of Europe? That's a question we might ask tomorrow, I think. But today, we have to debate the subject which is dominating everything else on our agenda, dominating everything else that has to be decided in Europe, the Eurozone crisis. And it is a hell of a challenge. I went to Berlin just over 2 years ago now. It was going back to Germany for me because I'd been there 20 years ago as correspondent. And I arrived on February the 1st, and on about February the 3rd, there was a briefing by two of Angela Merkel's senior advisors on a Franco-German summit, which was about to occur, I think, on the 4th or 5th of February. And I remember that the two gentlemen came down and they had this wonderful document of about 80 different Franco-German initiatives that they were about to discuss and launch. Such fundamental things as making sure that there were identical electric plugs on both sides of the borders for electric cars, or that there was twinning between kindergartens, because I think they'd already had twinning between universities and secondary schools and primary schools, so now we were at kindergartens. Anyway, they went through the list of about 80 things, and finally, after they'd been going for about 20 minutes, I rather sheepishly put up my hand and said, "Excuse me, I'm new here, but are you going to be discussing Greece?" And there was a terrible silence, and then one of the gentlemen said, "Why should we?" And I said, well, I had the feeling that there was a bit of a financial crisis brewing in Greece. And he said, "Yes," said the gentleman, "that's a problem for Athens." And I said, well, I had understood that you were all in a monetary union and that it might be a problem for everybody. And I was regarded as somebody who had basically done something very rude in church. You didn't talk about the Greek crisis at that moment. Well, the rest is history. And we're still, I fear, in the middle of it. Kadri has given us the title to debate today, the Eurozone, out of the woods or out of order? And I think that it's pretty clear that we're not out of the woods yet. But we have a very interesting panel to debate and discuss this, and I hope that I will also bring many of you in from the audience to join in the debate. Because obviously Olli Rehn, as the commissioner who has been living and breathing this crisis almost every waking minute of his day, is somebody who can really bring a very clear perception to a very difficult problem. We have Valdis Dombrovskis, the Prime Minister of Latvia, who can give us the perception of somebody who sits at that table and is still waiting to join and no doubt wondering what it's going to be like. Patrick Honohan, the Governor of the Central Bank of Ireland, who is right at the coalface trying to dig his country out of it, and Alexander Stubb, bravely representing one of the last AAAs still afloat. And therefore, somebody who everybody else is hoping very much might still have a few ropes to chuck into the drowning ones in the middle. Now, I'm going to get everybody perhaps to make, not a serious, but a little bit of an opening statement perhaps, just to sum up where they think we are. Because it's been an extraordinary week with the French elections, the Greek elections, and the Spanish banking crisis all coming to a head. I think we have a big piece in the Financial Times today called "The 7 Days That Shook Europe." I'm slightly baffled by this. I think it's 6 days if you count carefully. But anyway, the sub-editors decided it was clearly 7. It's been a really extraordinary week, which has shown, I think, Olli Rehn, that we're not out of the woods by any means. But where are we and how do we get out of the woods? Will you start us off?
Thank you, Quentin, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thanks very much for a very thoughtful introduction. Although I must say that I have a message to Kadri and to you concerning the title. What's wrong with the woods? What's wrong with the forest? I'm a Finn. I lived next to the wood. My summer cottage is in a forest. I served 11 months in the Finnish armed forces in the forest, and in fact, that's part of the economic success story of Finland. That forestry industry is a very strong part of that. But be that as it may, I'm very grateful that I got the invitation here, and it's great to be in Estonia, which is a sound and solid member state of the Euro. And in fact, it's great to be here with Valdis Dombrovskis as well, because Latvia is one of the countries that is recovering from the crisis, from a very deep crisis of the past years. And in fact, as I'm sitting in the panel, I checked the figures for these countries, Latvia, Ireland and Finland. All the countries, according to our economic forecast of yesterday, are recovering and are going to have a relatively solid growth rate next year, at least in comparison of the European average. So where are we at the moment? As regards the European economy, we have a mild or shallow recession going on for the moment, and we should, according to our forecast, recover in the course of this year, during the second half of this year, and next year should be a period of slow recovery, slow and subdued recovery. And in this context, the crucial thing is, of course, to tackle the sovereign debt crisis with determination and mitigate the related banking sector fragilities, because this is essentially a crisis of confidence related to both the sovereign debt and banking sector problems. And therefore we have taken action in several fronts, including reinforcement of the financial firewalls of Europe. The European Central Bank has played a key role through its liquidity provision in December and in February. And the member states of the European Union have taken decisive action both as regards intensified fiscal consolidation and growth-enhancing structural reforms. If you look at Italy, for instance, or Spain, Italy has, especially since the relatively new government of Mario Monti, has taken very significant decisions. It is on track in terms of fiscal policy, and it has decided on several structural reforms, such as the labour market reform, which will help to redress long-standing economic structural problems in the Italian economy. Spain has particular problems because of the real estate bubble, the credit boom and real estate bubble over the past decade, which created very serious external imbalances in the Spanish economy, which are now being, rebalanced. Spain has yesterday taken a very important decision on the cleanup and recapitalization of the banking sector. It has essentially nationalized one of the major banks called Bankia, and our assessment is that this is a very convincing plan of action in order to ensure that Spain will have a resilient and viable banking sector, which is a necessary condition, not a sufficient but a necessary condition of returning to the path of sustainable growth. So to conclude, so that we can move on in the debate, what next? I see three things that are essential. First of all, it is essential to stay on course on fiscal consolidation, because we are suffering from a very high level of public debt, which increased from 60% to on average 90% in Europe. And we cannot solve this crisis by piling new debt on top of old debt, which is already damaging our economic growth prospects. Second, we need to pursue structural reforms in the member states, as has been done in the Baltic states, for instance, in Ireland, and these have to focus on areas where there are particular rigidities, both in product and labour markets, so that we can create preconditions for sustainable growth and job creation. And finally, yes, we need more investment. We need targeted investment, both public and private, and therefore the Commission has proposed, for instance, a substantial increase of the capital base of the European Investment Bank, which could relatively rapidly and effectively mobilize funding for investments in energy and green growth, in research and innovation, and other important aspects of economic growth. So the debate on consolidation versus growth is a false debate. We need both. We need to stay on course as regards fiscal consolidation, and at the same time we need to reinforce our actions in order to boost sustainable growth and employment.
Okay, thanks very much, Olli. It does strike me that while I totally hear what you're saying about saying this is a false debate between consolidation and growth, these are twin strategies that actually belong together. Having said that, politics is all about momentum and symbolism, and to actually have had this debate as the focus of the French election campaign in particular could almost be a liberating moment, couldn't it? I mean, it could shift the debate just a little bit more away from austerity and towards growth, and maybe it's precisely the right moment to be doing that, or am I just being over-optimistic?
I think we are witnessing a shift in the political debate, and in some ways that is certainly welcome, and from the point of view of the European Commission, we see that this is a moment to carpe diem, seize the moment, so that we expect that we will get now better and stronger support for some initiatives we have done, for instance, past year as regards the capital increase of the European Investment Bank, or for the creation of project bonds for investment, which would on its part facilitate more investment in infrastructure and other community and cross-border activities in Europe. So yes, we have a new political landscape that is having an impact on the debate, but at the same time, policy making is not only about symbolism; it's also about substance, and there is no way that we should relax on fiscal consolidation. And maybe as a last point I can make is that the Stability and Growth Pact of the European Union, which is the rule book of it's the constitution of the euro area, the pact is not stupid. It focuses on the structural sustainability of public finances over the medium term, and takes into account the fiscal space and macroeconomic conditions of each and every member state. and we will make accordingly our recommendations in 2 weeks concerning the fiscal policy stance of the euro area as a whole and each and every member state in the euro area.
Okay, that's great. Now I want to turn now to Prime Minister Dombrovskis, because in a way there are two aspects, two ways that Latvia comes to this moment. One, you have been through hell to get to where you are. In terms of fiscal consolidation, what you've been through actually is as tough as anybody has been through, and you seem to have actually got back onto an even keel, or be getting back onto an even keel, remarkably well. So it would be very good to hear from your experience how successful you feel that's been, and are you out of the woods? But on the other hand, have you been able to get out of the woods precisely because you were not a member of the Eurozone? And looking at the Eurozone from outside, is this still a club that you want to join?
Well, as Commissioner already clearly stated, what's wrong with the woods? But to speak seriously, yes, we certainly had a very substantial austerity program. We went through some 17% of GDP fiscal consolidation, which currently seems to be the largest package of fiscal consolidation which has been done in EU so far. And I think there were a couple of important lessons in a case of Latvia, which may be relevant also in a case of Eurozone, and then on the second part probably also on Latvia's intention to join. So first, I think what was quite important in a case of Latvia, that once we were in a crisis, we designed a clear exit strategy, how we are going to move out of the crisis. So what we are going to do as regards fiscal consolidation, what we are going to do as economic stimulus, which means which we could afford for that mainly being EU funds at that period, what we are going to do for social stability. And it happened to be that as an anchor of our exit strategy, it was joining the Eurozone as of January 1st, 2014. So this set for us two clear policy choices. First, to stick with a fixed exchange rate of Lats, and that would be a separate debate. It could be debating for hours why it's not worth devaluating the currency in the situation which we were as a very small and very open economy. And just a couple of words on this. It's common wisdom goes that you need to devalue the currency in order to regain the competitiveness, and it's seen in many Eurozone countries now that they exactly have many problems because they cannot devalue the currency. But if you look at the performance in Central Eastern European countries, in fact we see just the opposite. Those countries which were not devaluating their currencies, they were doing most in terms of real structural reforms, and currently they are having biggest increases in exports. So it's not those countries which devaluated which have highest export growth, but those countries which did not devaluate. Also in the case of Latvia, for the last 2 years we had some 30% growth in export each year. And second policy choice which was set by Euro adoption goal, it was reducing budget deficit to below 3% of GDP by this year. In fact, just recently we sent our estimate to the Commission. We expect this year's budget deficit being 2.1% of GDP and moving to 1.4% in next years. So clearly fulfilling Maastricht criteria as regards deficit and debt, and sticking with our intention to join Eurozone. Of course, when we set the target, then it was situation seemed to be more clear that crisis hit Latvia is seeking a safe haven of Eurozone. By now, this safe haven is maybe not so entirely safe anymore. Yeah? But still, we think it's a good idea for Latvia to join Eurozone because we have fixed exchange rate to euro. So should anything happen with euro, it will happen also with our currency, with Lats. And so we seem to have all the disadvantages, whatever those may be, of fixed exchange rate and none of the advantages of actually having euro. So we still think it's a good idea. Well, we were studying also quite carefully Estonia's experience in joining the Eurozone right in the middle of Eurozone crisis. And it seems that it still served as a positive signal about financial and economic stability in Latvia. And we expect it also being the case in Estonia, and we also expect this being the case in Latvia. And third, discussing this growth versus austerity. Well, our experience was that really financial stability is a precondition for economic growth. So in this case, as soon as we were able to regain financial stability by doing fiscal adjustment. So in fact, we front-loaded our fiscal adjustment. We did bulk of it in 2009, right during the crisis. We regained financial stability, and immediately we started to return to economic growth. Because really, once you have financial stability, people stop worrying. Well, they know where they are. Probably there was salary cut or this or that, but at least they know what to count with. Banks start lending again to your people and businesses, capital stops fleeing the country and actually starts coming back to the country. So really, without financial stability, you will not come to the economic growth. And so regaining financial stability, working on fiscal stimulus, which we had through EU funds, ensuring social stability, we were able to return to the growth. So last year we had 5.5% growth, which was a third fastest growing EU economy. First quarter of this year, we had 6.8% growth, seemed to be fastest growing EU economy. So really, it's not that austerity is preventing growth. In fact, if you are out of financial stability, you don't have any other option as to regain that financial stability to return to the growth. And that's what exactly we see with the countries which try to postpone the austerity. That, well, they are not getting back to the growth, and they are not getting back to the growth exactly for the reasons that they are not regaining confidence in financial markets.
Yeah. All right, but Prime Minister, can I put a couple of points to you on that, though? One, that if Latvia had not been such a relatively new country, i.e., so recently emerging from the former Soviet Union with independence, you'd have not been able to be so flexible. That you've actually, if you'd had much more established institutions and so on, and indeed, if your own people had not been through the trauma of actually those early years of independence, they'd have found it much more difficult to go through the sort of austerity you went through. Is it fair to say that you were a special case, or do you think your example is a good example for everybody?
Well, I must say that kind of debate is going down really poorly in Latvia. To say, okay, they are tough people, they have been through Soviet occupation, so okay, let's let them suffer. We cannot. But it doesn't seem to be the case. So also we can look at the experiences of 80s and 90s, when, for example, Nordic countries have been doing through also very substantial fiscal adjustment programs, both Finland and Sweden, and they also seem to be able to determine this exit strategy and seem to be able to do this austerity in order to regain their competitiveness, in order to return to economic growth. And that's exactly what also Nordic countries did. And you cannot really blame Nordic countries for being out of nowhere and out of woods. So I don't think it's such a relevant example. What I think is more important is to have this clear exit strategy. And currently it seems the problem is that in a case of Greece, there seems to be no clear exit strategy. Well, there is one bailout, then there's a second bailout. As soon as there is a second bailout, some ministers of finance in EU start to talk about third bailout. Now there is no government, and so on. So really, and this also kind of makes people to lose purpose. So what's the point of this all? And that's why we're discussing also the growth compact without really knowing what the growth compact means, because it seems some people think that growth compact means more deficit spending. Some people think it's more about liberalization, focusing on competitiveness. And I think we need both this austerity and growth compact, that not meaning more deficit spending, in order to create this clear exit strategy. So what we are doing in order to restore financial stability, what we are doing in order to regain economic growth. And once you have this strategy, then you can head towards it.
Okay, now I want to turn to Patrick Honohan, if I may, a man who was landed in his present job really after the full force of the hurricane had already hit Ireland, but who's therefore very much in the front line. Sitting in Berlin, Ireland is held up as being the great hope. You are the programme country that's going through all this deep unpleasantness enforced on you by the gentleman to your right, with a little help from Frau Merkel. And you're doing well, you're really getting it right. But having said that, you're in the front line of a banking crisis just as much as a sovereign debt crisis. Is Ireland really, I mean, can you see the light at the end of that? Okay, we accept that walking in the woods is very nice, but nonetheless, is there a light at the end of the walk?
Yes, well, of course, Ireland cut down its woods in the last century. And, so it's,
or did somebody else cut down your woods and take the wood away?
Cut down for the benefit of somebody else.
My wife is Irish, I hasten to say.
We were in a very difficult fiscal situation in Ireland 30 years ago. We came out of it, when people thought we couldn't come out of it, we came out of it rather well and had a long period of very rapid growth. And I think it's this experience that has hardened the Irish people to going through the difficult times again. They didn't expect to have to do it, but they know that things do turn round in the end. But I want to go back, though, to those earlier times in the 1970s and 1980s when we were imagining the euro and the discussions that were held in the European Union at that time. And there were various goals were seen for the euro. Of course, the convenience of no exchange rate movements. There was also, very important was the fact that any time there was a dollar crisis, it created a divergence of exchange rate movements within Europe and really spoilt the single market as it was evolving. But above all, it was the commitment device. If we could sign up to a common currency, we would get the credibility of the Bundesbank and be able to not worry again about these surges of inflation. And that was really the driving force behind it. So we created the euro. Did the euro cause the crisis? Actually, let's remember, although we're focusing on the euro these days, and the euro's, obviously this is the cutting edge of the crisis at the moment, but the euro did not cause the crisis. Many examples to give you for that. Of course, you can look at Ireland and its boom, fueled by money coming from other parts of Europe to finance the banking crisis. But Iceland had a banking crisis just the same. Latvia had a crisis very much similar in the boom and bust type of crisis. Latvia had a fixed exchange rate regime, though not the euro, but Iceland did not have a fixed exchange rate regime. Remember that we are only part of the great financial crisis, which was built up in an environment of huge financial flows. So why is it so bad in the euro area? And I think the reason it's so bad is that the euro area, I come back to it, it was a commitment device. You say, we are not going to have our currency anymore, we're going to have a common currency. And that means we're signaling to everybody out there that we're going to behave ourselves from a fiscal and macro and banking point of view. You don't need to worry because we have put all that monetary part out to the common currency area. Unfortunately, markets and governments believe this commitment device. Flows poured in on the assumption that somebody was looking after the macroeconomic policy and the banking policy. And so the scale of the flows, the scale of the over-indebtedness, and this is a debt problem, a debt crisis, as Olli Rehn has said. The scale became way out. And suddenly then, when people realized the commitments hadn't been adhered to, then it was a wrenching problem to get back on track. Can we get back on track? Yes, we can get back on track there. It's a political as well as an economic issue. And politicians have many challenges in delivering this. The ECB is there. I think people thought at a certain moment in November, December of last year, ECB has given up because people were asking ECB to do this, that, and the other. The ECB is not there. But I think since the announcement of the long-term refinancing operations, the market has realised, yes, the ECB is there, it's serious, it has lots of things up its sleeve that it can do if needed, consistent with its mandate, which was, after all, as I said, to provide a stable monetary platform. So that's the context in which I see this slow and painful recovery from something which went wrong because people believed in it too much. We must continue to believe in it.
See that people have started changing their fundamental behaviour. They don't think they're going to get away with it any longer.
Oh, I think that's absolutely clear. And that means behaviour by market participants as well as governments and people who run political parties. But the market behaviour is not terribly helpful because the market behaviour is, we can't be sure that everything is going to be 100% stable. And so they are putting in risk premia into government bond yields all over, which complicates the whole process of adjustment.
But what about, take the French and Greek elections last Sunday, and the interpretation generally in the media, I think probably oversimplistically, but you tell me, is austerity exhaustion. People have had enough austerity even before we've got things back on track. Now, certainly the Greek election was a backlash against that, and François Hollande won his election with the message too much austerity, now we go for more growth. Do you think there is a danger that actually people have just said, we cannot stand this any longer?
I think there's a big challenge for politicians in giving a very clear but nuanced explanation as to what they are up to. Now, the Greek, the two parties that have been in government in the last number of years in Greece have lost dramatically in the elections, in the same way as in Ireland, the outgoing government of last one just over 1 year ago lost dramatically. In Ireland, the context was a little bit different because the new government said, yes, we're going to do things different and better, but they did not imply in some way that there was an easy option. And this is the important thing for politicians. I'm not a politician. I don't think I could do this very well, but to explain who's going to win and who's going to lose in the adjustments and why. And that, I think, is work in progress, both in Greece and in France. When you talk about austerity, some people probably have the view that austerity is good in itself, and let's be austere because that will give us good results. But I think for most people and most politicians in Europe, austerity is really a consequence, an undesired consequence of necessary action to getting back to stability, and that when we're back to stability, things will not be as austere. So that's what everybody's looking for, is the quickest and safest path back to stability.
Let me put one more thing, though. I'm an ignorant journalist. I watch from the sidelines. and you see yet another phase coming up of bank rescues. You've done your bank rescues. Now Spain is pouring money into some of its banks. There is a real worry that what's going to happen in Greece, if they wobble seriously on this programme, the first thing that will go down will be the Greek banks, and we'll have to pour money. Isn't it about time we let a few more banks go to actually pay the price of their mistakes? It's something in Ireland, the government's been effectively bankrupted by saying we'll bail out the banks.
Quentin, a really nice question to ask a central banker.
Don't think I'm not ready for this one. I think we can talk too simplistically about letting banks go and so on and so forth. I think it is true that, from my point of view, and this is not a view that's widely shared, I think we have gone in Europe and to some extent in the United States, to a large extent in the United States, gone too far in being overly blanket coverage of all the liabilities of banks. And I think this could have been managed in a different way. But that's water under the bridge to a large extent. This is a cost that has been taken onto the national balance sheets, and it has complicated the recovery in a number of countries. Scale matters here. In Ireland, the banking losses were enormous. One of the 3 or 4 largest banking crises in terms of costs of the government in history. No matter what pessimistic analysts' calculations you take for Spain, the scale is entirely different and smaller. And in that sort of case, there is no question that the government is doing the right thing in, where necessary, injecting the much relatively smaller sums of money.
How large was the size of your banking sector at its highest point compared to the gross-national product?
Well, if we exclude the banks that solely dealt with international business and were just located in Ireland as a sort of export centre, if we look at the banks that were focusing, that were doing business locally as well as abroad, it was in the area of 3.5 times 4 times GDP. Of course, there were other banks that were located in Ireland that were simply dealing business with.
8 times. I mean, if you count.
If you count them, it got to 9 times or something. But that would not be a very relevant, because they weren't part of the problem. They weren't part of what was guaranteed or what was impacting on the rest of the economy.
It really is the complexity of this crisis, as Olli Rehn, you said right at the start, that you've got what is in essence a banking crisis and a sovereign debt crisis intertwined, and that's been the challenge. And each time you think you've got one side of the equation sort of just about under control, the other one seems to come round and catch you. Alexander Stubb, you will note this great diplomatic triumph that I've separated the two Finns on our panel to front and back to bookend the panel. But Alexander, you're a politician. You've been, therefore, you were caught from a well-behaved North European country in a political debate that says we don't want to keep pouring our good money into rescue funds for these profligate southerners. So you don't have the austerity exhaustion debate, you have the solidarity exhaustion debate to deal with. How the hell are you dealing with that?
It's not a very easy debate to have, I'll be fully honest with you. And for me, and I guess for us, the key question here is a bit philosophical. It's the question of justice. And I'll give you one example which is reverse to the one that we have at home. It's the example of failure. In the US, when the banks went down, there was a sense that something big happened and the US public was not happy that the government had to come and bail them out. But they lived with it. They felt it was just, it would save the system. But the tipping point was when the banks and the insurance companies started to pay bonuses for their CEOs and others. And that's when the system became unjust, because it was rewarding failure. And I would argue that probably the debate that we have in the austerity countries such as Finland and Germany about bailing out, for instance, Greece, is the reverse of that. The basic idea of the euro was, when it was founded, that when the economy is doing well, you save. When the economy is doing badly, you use those savings. And I think you used, Patrick, the term commitment currency. And I fully agree with you. You make a commitment, you make a contract, you make an agreement with the 17 other countries, and you expect them to hold it. Now, the frustration of the Finnish public, of course, is that some countries did not keep those commitments, and we have to bail it out. So yeah, we have the reverse of the austerity debate. We have the solidarity debate, which hasn't been very easy. How are we coping with it? Quite well.
Okay, but now I mean, this division between, if you like, solidarity and solidity, as they say in Germany, between, you know, being generous provided people actually do their fiscal consolidation, is a debate that divides France and Germany right at the heart of the Eurozone, with very different traditions, perhaps. I mean, I remember it was May 2009, and I'd just been to Athens, and I'd come away from Athens, and it was before the real drama, but it clearly something was going badly wrong in Greece. And I heard then it was already the problem. Latvia and Hungary were the problem, and nobody had quite spotted that Greece was coming down the track. And I went to Berlin, and I had an interview with a very senior minister in the then German government before the Grand Coalition. And we were really pushing him to see whether Germany was going to pay up money for Latvia and Hungary. And he said, that's okay, they're outside the Eurozone. But of course, inside the Eurozone, it's impossible. There is a no bailout clause. And I said, but what about Greece? And he put his hand over and he turned off my tape recorder. And I probably therefore shouldn't say what he said. He's no longer in office. He said, you know what really worries us is that behind Greece stand the French. And what he was actually saying, because I said, well, what do you mean? They're going to go bankrupt next? No. He said, it's the French view of the way we should run the Eurozone that worries me, that actually it will become a transfer union. Now, those big questions are very much back surely on the order paper, aren't they, Alexander?
Well, to a certain extent, yes. But I agree with all of those who say that the debate between austerity and growth is a false debate. Much like Olli said, you need both at the same time. My thinking of this whole crisis, if I simplify it, is to say that it's a crisis of a public sector, public spending. It's a crisis of a banking sector. And to be quite honest, it has been also skewed quite heavily, I would argue, Quentin, by the media. I mean, you were just saying that, well, we're just observing from the side and the rest of it. But there's an element of hysteria in it all. And right now, the big hysteria is, should we go for austerity or growth? And it's all been symbolized in the Greek election and the French election. I think we need both, because if this is a crisis of confidence, we need austerity. And I think we've gone quite far on that in terms of six-pack legislation, in terms of the fiscal compact. We've pretty much gone quite far. But then we need to start focusing on growth. But here's where the big debate comes. I think between the French and the Germans, and probably between, I'll say, Finns and the French, we believe that growth is about competitiveness. It's about a single market, it's about a digital single market, and it's about free trade. Then, unfortunately, there are those countries that still believe that you have deficit-driven growth. And I think that's absolutely absurd. If you think that the public sector can drive growth, then probably Zimbabwe would be the most competitive country in the world. You know.
Okay.
Estonia the worst.
And Estonia probably the worst. So, I mean, you know, this is the big fundamental ideological debate. It's not so much about solidarity versus austerity. It's austerity and growth going hand in hand and how you do it. But we in Europe must understand that the time of deficit-driven growth is simply over. A country like Finland, we started getting extremely worried when our public debt was going up towards 40%. It's 80 billion euros, and our GDP is about 180 billion euros. And we started to take measures in it. Estonia did the same thing. Latvia did the same thing. Sweden did the same thing. And this is the approach that we take. And I also don't buy the argument that austerity will not bring growth. Look at the countries which have taken the most fundamental structural changes in their economy. They are the ones that are growing. And I'll make a slightly unfair comparison as well. Look at the BRICS countries and look at the N11 countries, the next 11. They all fulfill the euro criteria today. And look at them, are they growing or not? They are growing. So, this sort of cheap debate that austerity kills growth simply doesn't work. It's a political trick.
Okay, I want to put one thing to you all, and I want to get the audience involved too. But let me put it very bluntly. Olli, what's the message you've got for the Greeks if they're going to hold another election? And what really terrifies me is, once you've got a trend running in a country, any country, towards the extremes, having a second election is just going to aggravate that trend. It's not going to bring people back towards the middle. How do you actually really address this debate where in Greece we see 70% of the population reject the rescue programme and 70% of the population want to stay in the euro? It just doesn't work, does it?
Well, you can't have your cake and eat it.
You can't have your baklava and eat it. Perhaps.
That's right. Yes, that's the challenge in the Greek debate for the moment. I would not want to fuel any further deterioration of the political situation by any strong statements from the European side. But I think the choice for the Greek people is very clear. Either you respect the commitments you have undertaken, which 16 other parliaments, 16 parliaments of other euro area member states have signed to after very difficult debates, ratified and supported these rescue packages or financing programs that provide economic reforms and fiscal adjustment and necessitate economic reforms and fiscal adjustment. So either you respect these commitments to fiscal consolidation and structural reforms, which will help to bring the Greek economy on a more sustainable footing and towards economic growth, or you don't, and then it's your choice. It's your choice.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to say, because we're dealing with the crisis now, but there is a bigger picture, and that is making sure that it doesn't happen again. And that would be put, I think, let me, quote many German politicians who have said the fiscal pact is the first step towards a fiscal union. Now, are we ready to do that? Let me come to Prime Minister Dombrovskis. Is the European Union ready to really take steps? I mean, fiscal union is much more than budget discipline. This means a serious central budget, which is considerably bigger than it is now. This means probably much more coordination of taxation, coordination of policies, sort of the six-pack and everything else writ large. Is Europe ready to take this step towards fiscal union? Is Latvia ready?
Well, first of all, we see that that Europe is heading in this direction, but it's not heading very quickly, and I don't expect this being a very quick process, because we see that some countries like some part of this process of more fiscal discipline, of more tax policy coordination and harmonization with other issues, others like other parts of this processes with Euro bonds, with European bonds, whatever they're properly called, with larger EU budgets and so on. And so currently those two sides are not entirely overlapping. So I wouldn't expect this being very quick process, but tendency is quite clearly towards more fiscal union.
Are you having that debate in Latvia now? Are people actually saying, wow, we're about to go much more towards an integrated European Union, much further than we are now?
Well, the debate is there, but again, it's as in other European countries, it's relatively fragmented. Of course, there are questions raised about European Stability Mechanism. We just finished the ratification of it. Yeah. So, that means that we'll have to pay for someone and so on.
Yeah.
But there seems to be a degree of willingness actually to go deeper into European integration. That's why we were part of this Euro Plus Pact. That's why we joined Fiscal Compact and so on. So we're willing to go into this core Europe. That's why we stick with plans to join the Eurozone.
Okay. I'm going to go to Alexander.
Yeah, I mean, just on the sort of big picture in all of this, I belong to the camp of people. Olli knows this very well, that I'm not a closet federalist. I'm very much.
You're
a
an
federalist.
insane public federalist.
Public
yeah,
federalist.
Like me.
And my argument is that you cannot have monetary union without economic union. And the mistake took place already in the early 1990s when the finance ministries did not allow for an economic union to be created. Now we are creating it basically by force and pretty much ad hoc. The 1990s was an enlargement, crisis-driven decade. 2000 was an institutional crisis-driven decade. And I would argue that 2010 will be an economics-driven crisis decade, if you will. We're doing it piece by piece. Fiscal compact is a good example of it. Six-pack legislation is a good example of it. One observation, though, I do not think that we will ever reach the stage of a fiscal union whereby we transfer our national budgets to Brussels and start distributing the money from there.
Yeah.
Because the basic question is, do we keep our budget at 1% of the GDP and then have some kind of budgetary controls and restraints from the Brussels side, or do we transfer everything over and then start distributing the money? I don't think the latter will happen, and this is not only because I'm intimately engaged with the multi-annual framework right now and in the camp of the net contributors. But what I do think, however, is going to happen in the future, I think that the time for old-fashioned intergovernmental conferences is simply over. We will not be able to change the treaties through unanimity anymore. Therefore, you will see fiscal union or economic union being created very much ad hoc, piecemeal, step by step. That's why the fiscal compact is outside the treaty framework right now. And we're not going to be slowed down by the slowest common denominator. So the EU is going to start getting even messier than what it is right now. But much like Valdis said, economic union will happen. In that sense, I'm a functionalist. Integration in one area will lead to integration in another one. And that's why we're going to have more integration. And what I love about this debate, and then all the sort of extreme left in France, Mélenchon, or extreme left extreme right in France, Le Pen, or some of the localist movements that we have, they can't have their cake and eat it too. In other words, they cannot criticize Greece for not sticking to the commitments and us bailing out unless we have serious, legally binding rules. And this is where the paradox of the whole system comes in.
Okay. Olli?
I would very much agree with Alex, who is a real federalist.
You don't have to. You're in different parties.
Well, I'm coming to that. But, it's a curve. It's a curve. So he's a real federalist. It seems that he's also become wiser because he's increasingly a functionalist. Because I'm the last living functionalist in Europe, but I'm a closet federalist as well. So, but more seriously, I think what Alex said about economic governance is indeed crucial, and it will, the reinforced economic governance that we have created, both the six-pack legislation, which is already in force, and it is being used, and it is already delivering, because the public deficits are going down, and we are seeing that this is biting and providing some convincing instruments. So both the existing legislation and the forthcoming fiscal compact treaty are essentially about preventing the kind of crisis we have experienced now in the past years. And of course, prevention is always much better and cheaper than correction, as we have seen in the past years. But here we have to get our analysis right. This is not only a fiscal crisis, this is a crisis which has its roots and origins in the macroeconomic imbalances and divergences in competitiveness between different European or Euro area countries. And you can see it in a sense that maybe in Greece, maybe concerning Greece, it was mostly a fiscal crisis. It was also a matter of statistical fraud, but it was also a matter of economic imbalances. But if you take Ireland or you take Spain, both had a relatively low level of public debt when the crisis hit in 2007. Your debt was, I think, at the lowest 27% of GDP. Spain also below 30% of GDP 5 years ago. And then the debt started rocketing. Now in Ireland it's about 100%, over 100% of GDP. Spain is still below or around 60%. This was not a fiscal crisis. In Ireland it was a banking crisis which turned into a fiscal crisis. And in Spain it was a crisis created by the credit boom and the property bubble, which then has turned into a banking crisis and also into a fiscal crisis. And therefore, it's not enough that we only have the fiscal rules. We also need instruments to address macroeconomic imbalances. And I recommend to all of you to study our reports, which we will present in 2 weeks on the 30th of May, on 12 countries and their macroeconomic imbalances. That should highlight this problem and provide some ways and means of addressing and correcting this. One final point, I've taken some notes in this debate because I realized that we have a waterproof theory of preconditions to live and succeed in the euro area or in a monetary union. Especially for small states, you need 3 elements. First, you need a relatively flexible economy, both concerning product and especially labor markets, so that your wage formation reflects productivity developments. Second, you need an effective prudential regulation of the banking sector to avoid the kind of credit booms and real estate bubbles we have experienced. And third, yes, you need sustainable public finances, strong buffer, and I would say even over-sustainable public finances to be prepared for the worst of times. So, flexible economy, well-regulated banking sector, and sustainable public finances. In fact, this is what I wrote in my doctoral thesis at Oxford already in 1996, and the real world has only proven that correct.
And there was no plagiarism in it, was there?
No way. No way.
Now, I've got several hands I've seen from the floor, another one here at the front. Do we have microphone? Yes? More than one microphone? Or well, actually, to be honest, the first hands I saw were right at the back over there. So could you take, yes, to one of the gentlemen at the back? I can't actually quite see who everybody is, so just tell us who you are.
Thank you. Tom Rees, Swedish National Defence College. It looks like the odds are now getting pretty big that Greece is not going to be able to eat the cake. In other words, that they may have to leave the Eurozone. What would be the consequences for the Euro and for the European banking system if this happens?
Pass the microphone to the gentleman just to your left there, yes? And we'll have a couple of questions to get us going.
Hello, Paul Srauceps from the weekly magazine Meri in Latvia. Specifically for Commissioner Rehn, I mean, while some countries perhaps are trying to get out of the woods, there are countries that are very much trying to get into the woods, like Latvia, which is working very hard to fulfill the criteria to join in 2014. And yet, first of all, in Latvia, there's a certain concern that within the ECB and the Commission, there isn't a kind of welcoming attitude into this, into the leafy environs of the Eurozone, specifically concerning the specific criteria that will be used to evaluate Latvia's ability to meet the Maastricht criteria for inflation. And I also have a question. About a month ago, in other words, after the six-pack was adopted, after the signing of the fiscal compact, Commissioner Rehn, you said that the Eurozone's ability to take decisions has to be significantly strengthened. You said that in an interview to Finnish television about a month ago. Has to be significantly strengthened before the Eurozone can be expanded. And perhaps you could talk about what else and more has to be done and how that might impact Latvia's ability to join in 2014. Thank you.
Right. Olli Rehn, you're on the spot.
Thank you. If I start on your question concerning Latvia's accession and the criteria, and of course I'm speaking under the control of Valdis Dombrovskis. I mean, our criteria of accession to the euro area are in fact very clear. We have two sets of criteria. We have, first of all, the numerical or quantitative criteria, which are the 5 convergence criteria of the Maastricht Treaty or the now Lisbon Treaty. And then we have, on top of that, we make a qualitative assessment based on economic analysis over the sustainability of the economy of the country concerned. That's what we did, for instance, concerning Estonia 2 years ago in 2010, which then paved the way for the membership of Estonia in the euro area, where the Commission was the driving force, while in the ECB Governing Council there were some more skeptical voices, though not, I think, Patrick Honohan in this regard. So these 5 criteria stand, and on top of that there's going to be a qualitative analysis. And I refer to Estonia. There was a debate on Estonia's membership, but in the end, do you know what was the most convincing argument? Because in politics, you always, if you have several arguments, you'd better stick to one which is the most convincing one. And in the case of Estonia, it was the level of public debt. At the moment of Estonia joining the euro area, the average level of public debt in the euro area was 75%. So 75%. Guess what was it in Estonia? It was 7.5%. So these 75ers did not tell the 7.5 country Estonia that you don't meet the criteria, so you are not welcome to the club. And in fact, it was the right decision, because Estonia has been a very solid and sound member state of the euro area, of which I'm very, very happy and grateful.
I've had a senior moment. The first question was...
We can't even imagine.
You are a voting member of the Governing Council, so you take first. I'm a non-voting member. It's about the banking sector, Greece. Banking sector.
So this is often discussed in newspapers, and at a certain moment, I think people casually would talk about this kind of an event. Maybe a year ago, people said, "Oh well, that could happen." I think the more people have thought about such an event for Greece, they consider it to be a very unattractive hypothesis for the rest of the euro area, and a rather destabilizing kind of event. And I think it's clear that everybody is working to try to avoid it. So there's on all sides, including in Greece. Can it be managed? It's not imagined in the legislation, in the treaties, but things that happen that aren't imagined in the treaties. Technically, it can be managed, but it would be a knock to confidence for the euro area as a whole, and so it would add to the complexity of the operations until things settled down again.
If Greece...
It's not necessarily fatal, but it's not attractive. And
if Greece says we no longer accept the terms of this rescue package, end of, is that... I mean, what Jörg Asmussen appeared to be saying earlier
not
this
ipso,
week...
Not ipso facto. It's not ipso facto.
Not ipso facto mean exit from the Eurozone. It sort of politically would mean virtually.
I think that has huge consequences.
Yeah.
It has huge consequences. But I'm just talking in legal terms. It's not ipso facto.
Anders Asland had a question, I think, over there, yes?
Thank you very much. I would like to follow up a bit with Olli Rehn on what could happen with Greece. If Greece ends up in total disorder, as seems quite likely right now, can the European Commission, by any legal means, go in and sequester expenditure so that Greece does not default? Would that be a possibility, or would you just bankroll it as was done the other day.
Isn't there an agreement, isn't part of the agreement that the money's all going into an account which will first service debt before it does anything else?
That's correct. That's correct.
And let me follow up.
Sorry, I'm interrupting.
With another one. And if Greece departs, do you see any possibility for Greece not seeing its payment system collapse? Could it be kept alive if Greece voluntarily leaves the Eurozone? Thank you.
Okay, Olli, yes.
This question of Anders Åslund is very much related to the first question from the audience. Of course, I do not want to go and speculate on a scenario if or how Greece would leave the euro and what kind of consequences that would have to the banking sector. I still believe that Greece can stay in the euro and finds a way to ensure that it respects its commitments with the euro area and euro area member states and their 16 parliaments who have underwritten the agreement with Greece, which is underpinning the program of economic reform and fiscal adjustment. I'd just say that it would be much worse for Greece and for the Greek citizens, especially to the less well-off citizens, if Greece were to leave the euro, than for Europe as such. Europe also would suffer, but Greece would suffer more, and therefore it would be much better that Greece finds a way to take the necessary decisions in order to stay in the euro. That's better for Greece especially, but also for Europe. From the European point of view, 2 years ago, if Greece would have gone under and faced a default, a disorderly default, Europe would have been massively unprepared, and we would have faced a situation like the US faced after the Lehman Brothers catastrophe, which would have had global consequences in the world economy. Even 1 year ago, it would have had a major impact in the European economy. It would still be a problem, but we are certainly more resilient than we were, for instance, 2 years ago. But as I said, I do not want to see this happen, and we are working in order to ensure that facilitate Greece staying in the euro. But of course, the ball is now in the Greek court and in the hands of the Greek people and political leaders.
Alexander, isn't it about time that people just bit the bullet and said, look, Greece can't stay there any longer. It doesn't want to, and we don't want it.
No, absolutely not. I mean, you know, I think Olli put it very well right at the end. He said it's in the hands of the Greeks themselves. Of course, they are right now in the midst of a political crisis. There's no question about it. We'll have to see if the president succeeds in forming a government. Probably unlikely, which means that there'll be a second round of elections. The outcome of that will determine, I'll be very blunt with you, the membership of Greece in the Eurozone. But it is only in the hands of the Greeks. The rest of us have probably done more than has been called for already at this particular stage. Biting the bullet, I don't think it's worth doing. I think we should do everything in our power to keep Greece inside. And at the same time, if Greece goes due to their own failure, then we have created sufficient firewalls. It'll shake the grounds a little bit, but it won't destroy it.
Okay. Question here in the front.
Matti Masikas, Estonian Minister.
Not quite working yet.
Louder.
Yeah.
Is it working?
That's it.
Matti Masikas, Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I have a question to Alexander Stubb. Alex, I absolutely agree with you on the need to move towards more integration, economic union, fiscal union. My simple question is, do your voters share your views on that? Isn't the biggest political threat at the moment the fact that even when the political elite of the EU member states are starting to realize what needs to be done, their voters and the citizens are not more willing to follow them? Thank you.
Okay, good question. And just behind you, there's another. Yeah? Gentleman there.
Hans Brask, Baltic Development Forum. We need fiscal consolidation, but also growth. That's clear and has come out quite clearly. But isn't the case that the EU is better in ensuring consolidation than growth? I just wonder whether the EU at the present moment has any instruments that could create growth, at least in the short term. We heard that the EIB will get extra funds, but it is still a bank that needs good projects, good bankable projects. And I guess those who need growth mostly do not have so many bankable good projects. So I just wonder what could be done in the present situation to create growth in the short term. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to also take some more questions over this side too. Is there a microphone? Chancellor, okay, yes.
Thanks very much. Steve Erlanger
Steve,
from
take it first.
the New York Times. This has been a very northern debate, I have to say.
Où sont les Français?
No, mais it's not very sympathetic. I think in France, let's just say very quickly, austerity wasn't a big issue in the debate. France hasn't had much austerity, as we all know. It may have a bit more to come, but both candidates talked about that. So I don't see this as a great... Greece and France are two very, very different things. I think we had an actually quite responsible debate about public spending in France. Both candidates were fairly open about the fact they needed to balance the budget by the end of 5 years. Whether they will or not is a whole other question, but the French know something is coming. But on Greece, I have to say, I mean, the North profited wonderfully from these imbalances. And I must say, Alex, you seem very ungenerous. We've done too much already for Greece, you said, something like that, or done more than perhaps we should have done. Maybe we could print occupation euros and give those to the Greeks in the meantime. But you have a democratic revolt against a program all of you helped to design. Do you not feel any responsibility for that program? Perhaps it was misjudged. Perhaps you got it wrong. Perhaps it was too harsh. Perhaps it didn't give them enough time to do the adjustment. Perhaps you didn't give them the instruments to actually get the adjustment done, to help them make themselves a modern state. And it's not just a Greek problem, it's a Portuguese problem too. So that's what I really would like to push you on. First, aren't you being a bit smug? Haven't you benefited a bit from these problems in your own economies? And are you not being a bit quiet about your own responsibility for the failure of this adjustment plan in political terms? Thank you.
Could you, Steve, pass the microphone forward? No, this way first to Chancellor Schüssel. Sorry.
I continue. I'm Wolfgang Schüssel from Austria, and I continue with the so-called problem growth versus austerity. For me, it's a déjà vu. We had the same debate years ago when we created the Stability Pact. And then we had economic problems, and the Social Democrats and some other leaders said, no, austerity is not enough, stability is not enough, we need a growth pact. Now we have the Stability and Growth Pact, and the result is, as we know it, Schröder and Chirac de facto neglected the Stability and Growth Pact. At that time, an Italian, Romano Prodi, was president of the Commission, and he created this strange sentence, the pact is stupid. And the result is where we are. And now we have the same. We have the fiscal pact, and now, again, the discussion is going on that we need growth. And
how do we get the balance right?
Yeah, but the funny thing is, since 2 years, it's May 2010, 2 years ago, when Mario Monti, asked by the Commission, presented a paper for completing the single market. And this paper, if you add all these ideas, an energy market, digital market, completing services, very important services, getting rid of all the barriers in the labor market, creating more mobility, it would add 1.5 to 2% additional growth per year. So this is the reality. The Commission, by the way, presented a lot of ideas and programs, not everything, but I think 80% were presented, and the Council did not decide on it, and the Parliament as well. So this is the reality. This is a solution, not deficit spending, but structural reforms, completing the single market. This is the way out of the woods or to the bright future.
Can you pass the microphone to the back row? you're right.
I am Alan Riley, City University, London. I also have some sympathy for the Greeks on this. I mean, you know, we have to be aware of the fact that yes, I mean, if you read Michael Lewis's great piece in the Vanity Fair about the scale of Greek corruption, yes, that is part of the story. But there's another part of the story too. It is partly also about the fact that Greece could never benefit from the European Union. It was a democratic state in a Soviet sea. How could it benefit from the single market? It was for many years completely unable to actually benefit in the way the other European states could benefit. You
like
have
Finland,
a situation...
Like Finland is an island in the north, very far from the rest of the single market.
Well, there's another island indeed, which is... But the point about all of this is that you have got a situation that, first of all, in Greece, one of the things I worry about tremendously is you've got the social collapse which is going on, 50% unemployment and rising amongst the youthful population of the country. The sense of disconnection from liberal values, support for the European project, and the point about having a second election. When you start thinking, and this is really awful, but you start thinking about it quite seriously, is about the late 20s and the early 30s in Germany, and as things got worse, the more elections we had, the greater the number of radical and extremist parties began to take control of the parliament. I think the question is the European project pushing some of the European states into a situation of extremism which we lose complete control of? And we end up, whatever we end up with, we can't just say it's up to the Greeks. Surely we should be thinking about a plan B for even if they are going to leave the Eurozone, which can support them, which can push them back on a pathway towards some form of liberal order which they can support. Otherwise, we may end up with something which is much, much darker and disastrous. And I think this is a danger of kind of liberal power elites thinking entirely in technical terms with a huge sense of sanctimonious, we are right, not understanding that you're dealing with a democratic structures under immense stress where people flood to the extremes. And it's very interesting. I think sometimes reread Adam Ferguson's book on the death of money, about the Weimar inflation. Think about the stress the German people were put under then and their response, and then think about the Greeks and the other southern European states and think what may happen again. That's my point, and I'd ask them to reflect on that.
Thank you very much, Alan. Now I'm coming back to the panel. This is the final round, because Kadri just gave us an extra 5 minutes at the beginning. Alexander,
I think 5 big questions, and I'll try to give you 2 a little bit unfair answers. The first one is, I think we're moving to a new stage in the ideological world of Europe. We have a juxtaposition between what I would call localists and globalists. Localists are people who are anti-EU, anti-Euro, anti-globalization and anti-immigration. Globalists are exactly the opposite to that. This is the ongoing big debate and comes back to the question of voters. I joke around about this, but I'll say it very seriously. There are a whole bunch of true Finns all around Europe who are frustrated with what Europe has done, who are frustrated with the austerity measures, etc., etc. The second level of this is an ideological debate, nevertheless, among states. And here's where we come to the debate about competitiveness versus deficit-driven growth. And here you have the traditionalists, call us northerners or whatever you want, who believe in the single market, who believe in the digital single market, which, by the way, would push 4% of the GDP up like that, and who believe in liberal trade policy. So this is the state type of a debate that we have going on. I will continue to push for the liberal, international, European, global agenda, whether voters like it or not, because I happen to believe in it. And I do agree that we are perhaps in a 1929 type of a moment, where these extreme movements are starting to lift their ugly heads, and we don't really know how to deal with it. The second point I wanted to make, and this will be my final one, is please, let's not and I shouldn't probably say this after the debate that we've had, let's do not over-exaggerate the importance of the time in history in which we live. The European Union is a crisis management union. It goes from one crisis to another. In the 60s, it was about institutions and empty chairs. In the 70s, it was about the oil crisis. In the 80s, it was the crisis of the single market. In the 90s, it was the crisis post-Cold War. In the 2000s, it was the institutional crisis. Now we are in an economic crisis. But at the end of the day, we usually find some kind of a solution to it. The only difference from previous crises is that this is not about institutions, this is not about enlargement, this is not about the multi-annual framework. This is about fundamental issues that the European Union is all about. In other words, it is about the euro, it is about Schengen, and it is about the internal market. And that makes this crisis a little bit different from previous ones. But at the end of the day, the eternal optimist says, we will be here next year, Greece will be in the euro, and the euro will have survived.
Thanks very much, Alexander. Patrick, some very political questions, which I know deeply uncomfortable to a central banker. Central banking is becoming very political.
Very political. But that's the reality. Technicalities are easy relative to politics, but central banking works in a political environment. And I think that we talked about, are we moving towards a fiscal union? I think not in any coordinated or systematic way, but I think some of the steps that are being taken now look like steps of elements that people saw in a fiscal union. That doesn't mean we'll get there. The six-pack being consolidated in the fiscal compact is a process, as I see it, of building or rebuilding trust, political trust across Europe in an environment where there's a risk of a fault line developing. And normally in Europe there have been many issues over the years, but they haven't all consolidated along a fault line, which now I think risks emerging between the creditor and the debtor countries. I think this is quite a worrying development, and I think rebuilding trust across that line and rebuilding a consensus around the policies that need to be adopted. And I agree with the speakers who said that when you have a situation where the policies seem to be being imposed on countries, that's not viable. The country's politicians must find policies which are consistent with regaining fiscal balance and that they can buy into. They can't just say, we are complying with some external rules.
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, very interesting point talking to President Barroso actually earlier this week about the difficulty in Europe when one message is for your domestic audience and another message is for the outer audience, or the message for the domestic audience gets through to the outer audience. I mean, thinking of Wolfgang Schäuble the other day, when he made, to me, the eminently sensible point of saying, perhaps it'd be a good idea if the Greeks postponed this election for a year, caused absolute horror in Greece about he's telling us how to behave and what to do. Olli Rehn, there was some, particularly from Steve Erlanger there, we have got this programme wrong, perhaps. Should we look at it again for the Greeks?
We are getting plenty of good advice from outside the euro area, especially from the British Isles.
Or the other side
with
of the
carrying
Atlantic.
all the responsibilities that this implies. I'm very grateful that, and I'm very genuinely grateful for the advice we get from our American friends and the support they give to the solving of the euro area crisis, because they see that it is a matter about the stability in the global economy, and therefore it is essential that the euro area will be able to solve its own problems. I share many of the concerns related to the politics that have been discussed here. Of course, we all who have political responsibilities, we need to regain the trust of the citizens, and at the same time we have to restore confidence in the markets, and sometimes it is a very challenging dilemma that we are facing. Concerning Greece, because there were some points about, say, excessive austerity and excessive consolidation, I just give you two facts, and you may then think yourselves if this is excessive or not. Greece in 2009 had a public deficit of over 15%, almost a fiscal deficit of 15%, or almost 16%. That's before the program started. In 2010, when the program started in the middle of the year, deficit was still around 11%, and last year it was slightly below that. Greece has done a lot, but still the fiscal deficit is close to 10%, which means still 10 euros out of 100 of the Greek welfare state, Greek public sector, is borrowed from abroad or from domestic investors. And 2009 and before that, 15 euros out of 100. Does anybody really seriously believe that this is a sustainable economic model? I cannot believe it. As regards what Europe is doing to help Greece, Marshall aid was about 2.5% of GDP of the recipient countries. Very important. The US played its role as external federator and provided great help for European integration. In the case of Greece, Greece is getting external aid in terms of loans or debt relief altogether 177% of its GDP. 200 billion from the Europeans and the IMF in terms of loans, and about 100 billion of debt relief from the private creditor community. I would not call that insignificant, even from the point of view of European solidarity. And finally, I agree very much with Wolfgang Schüssel, who said that it's the structural reforms that are essential. Investment is important, but in the end of the day, we have to realize that Europe's economic and social model needs to be reformed. That calls for such kind of wave of reforms that is going on in the member states, such as Italy or Spain for the moment, to make our economies more dynamic. And the single market is here the growth engine of Europe. But yes, that engine also needs additional fuel. And because there is a shortage of investment for the moment, we need to stimulate public and private investment to provide additional necessary fuel for the growth engine of Europe.
Thanks very much. Last word to Prime Minister Dombrovskis. Just a minute, I fear, Prime Minister. Do you agree with Alexander Stubb that you can still be an optimist?
I am still an optimist. We are still willing to join in the woods. Yeah. But as regards this debate about austerity or no austerity, of course, anyone can say no to austerity. But before saying no to austerity, one should better ask question first, okay, if I say no to austerity, who is going to finance it? So currently financial markets seem not to be in a mood to finance no to austerity, and it seems that also contributors from other EU countries or Eurozone countries also are running out of willingness to finance the countries saying no to austerity. And and that's as simple as it is. So who is going to finance? As soon as there's no one to finance it, of course you can say no to austerity, but then find your way to finance this approach. As Carl Bildt famously wrote in his blog, that Greek people essentially have voted for other European taxpayers giving them more money, but the probability of this to happen should not be exaggerated. And that's exactly what it is currently. And as being from a country which was in a bailout program outside Eurozone, I think for us it was made relatively clear, and the feeling was really that we either deliver, we either meet our fiscal targets, or European Commission and IMF would just walk away. What's happening in Greece European Commission and IMF are saying pretty much the same. You either deliver or we will walk away. Then Greeks are not delivering and the European Commission is paying more money. Of course, after a couple of rounds like this, the feeling starts, yeah, do we really need to deliver? They are paying anyway. 2 days ago, European Commission paid to Greece something like 3 or 4 billion euros. Which
Member
was,
States paid, sorry.
well, okay, but nevertheless, it was more or less amount we received from Europe during our entire bailout program. I don't think anyone would be paying us money in a situation when elections would produce a parliament where majority is against the bailout and there's no real government. So, but it seems what is complicating the situation is that yes, Greece is in Eurozone and nobody knows how to deal it. So it's much easier to deal with the countries outside the Eurozone, to say you deliver or whatever, it's your problem, than to use the same approach to the countries in Eurozone. But gradually it seems that also this moment of truth is coming, that countries also within Eurozone will either help to deliver or other countries will be saying that we are not willing to put this money in this bottomless place. So that's more or less what I was talking in my introductory remarks about. You need to have an exit strategy. And that's the point. So that's why Greeks are frustrated. They don't see the exit strategy. That's why other countries are frustrated. They also don't see this exit strategy.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Thank you very much, all the panel, for your thoughts.